Welcome back, everybody, to You Have Permission, the podcast that aims to take both Christianity and the modern world of science and culture very seriously. My name's Dan Koch. I'm a licensed therapist, and I'm a post-evangelical liberal Christian, just waiting 50 minutes every day to meet Jesus. Much like Mary Magdalene here in the first episode of The Chosen, I am joined by Jeff Martin, dear personal friend from our touring rock band days. You sang lead and played guitar in Buffalo, New York's This Day and Age. Jeff, thank you for being here with me.
Thanks for having me, Dan. I've always been just kind of your music friend, and I feel like I've sort of graduated to another level of friendship.
Yeah, you've jumped up an echelon here to make it onto You Have Permission. We are trying out a new series here called We Watched The Chosen So You Don't Have To. I'm very excited about this. I want to tell people why I have you here with me. And Jeff, we recently had a lot of fun, a very fun and meaningful time doing some podcasting on my music show, Pretty Good Vibrations. And I've been looking for a reason to do more stuff with you on You Have Permission. We both love film and TV, and I've been kicking around this idea to watch and respond to The Chosen, the smash hit television series depicting the life of Jesus as narrated in the four Gospels. I noted on some other podcast or other, as well as to some of my friends in real life, maybe 9 months ago, that at that time, I was more comfortable interviewing a Satanist on You Have Permission than I was watching The Chosen.
Wow. That is quite a statement. I don't know if I remember you saying that.
Yeah, I can't remember how public I was about that, but I distinctly felt it. And it wasn't because I think that The Chosen is like scarier than a Satanist or Satan or whatever, but it was like, I have a real aversion to sort of like Christian produced media, which I think is understandable probably to anybody who listens to the show. Right. And, just, I don't know, not knowing what were the intentions of the producers of the show and just not wanting to, go there. But much like, I don't know, late stage capitalism, the pressure does not go away. And everyone continues to tell me and you and every other person in their life to watch The Chosen. It might be the most recommended show by evangelicals to everyone else in the history of the medium. Does that track with your experience?
It definitely does. And it is my oldest son, who's only 9. He came home one day and was like, Dad, we got to watch The Chosen together. And I was like, wow. I mean, we don't really relate on TV levels at this stage in our father-son relationship.
Yeah. Well, and how old is he?
He's 9. He's in 3rd grade.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So that's kind of fun. I mean, I was definitely thinking as I watched that it is not appropriate for my 4-year-old. Definitely way too much scary stuff. But
especially that first scene, which I know we're going to get to, but there are some, demonic possession kind of things. And, obviously a lot related to theology and et cetera, interpretation.
Yeah, there's some heavy stuff, definitely heavy content for kids. But the reason that I'm calling these episodes, We Watched It So You Don't Have To, it's not like The Chosen, Jeff, is a good show in the way that The Bear or Succession or Beef or Shogun are good shows. Like, do you, is that kind of your sense as well? Or how close does it get for you to the like prestige, high quality television that you and I both love?
Right. Yep. It's one of these shows that I'm almost creating like a new category for. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I also have that aversion to sort of Christian entertainment or, especially on the movie or TV side, I was pleasantly surprised in a lot of ways because I think I had already set the bar so low that I was kind of like, wow, this is way better than I expected. But when I think about The Bear or Breaking Bad or, some of the shows that you just mentioned, I still wouldn't put it in that realm, although it pleasantly surprised me.
It's kind of like a get out of media jail free card for evangelicals because it is well enough produced.
Yeah.
That it can kind of compete. And there's a handful of like, like some character actors you might recognize and, stuff like that. And the production quality is extremely high. I will say that. You and your wife are already partway through the series. Like we talked about it and you guys had already watched 2 seasons, 1 season? Where are you at?
Yeah, I think we're like towards the end of season 2.
there will be times I'm gonna talk about it as I watch live. I'm not gonna watch ahead for these episodes. We do plan to do the whole first season, and I think we will have some special guests joining us at some point.
Yeah.
Probably we'll tend to do more like 2 episodes of the show per 1 episode of this. But on this first one, there's kind of a lot to set up. I want to introduce you. I want to talk about the show in general. So we're just going to do the pilot, episode 1. So please, listeners, let me know what you think of this and subsequent episodes of this that we do. I'm really wondering how much appetite there is for a project like this. There's a lot of reasons for that, but chief among them, I think that media, filmed media, whether it's TV or movies, provides like a really good and organic foil against which to talk about the things that I'm interested in. Mm-hmm. So we will get into a lot of psychology. We'll definitely get into theology and sort of biblical scholarship because of the content of this show. But in any show, there's going to be psychology and other things like that to kind of get into. So I'm just kind of curious. I'm hoping that there's demand for something like this because I love it, but tell me if it sucks. That's fine too. I'd like to know the truth.
Yeah, I wonder what your audience, if others kind of in this realm of maybe, progressive Christianity and all of the different ways that you described yourself, and those who listen to the show are sort of hearing it in the same way that we are starting to hear about it and are sort of curious or have even begun watching it. And so let me know too. I think maybe we'll find out together, right? Like how people are.
We will.
Thinking.
We're on this road together.
Yeah, just let me know if you could in advance.
Like the 2 people who on the road to Emmaus who didn't recognize Jesus. It's you and me, Jeff, on this road together. Yeah, I mean, there was a Super Bowl ad, I believe, for The Chosen, and it's on Netflix now. So I mean, it's definitely big. They were airing, 2 episodes at a time in movie theaters a few months ago. I mean, it's a huge cultural artifact. So I do think that people have heard about it. Jeff, I thought it would be good to give a little thumbnail sketch of where you're coming from faith-wise, because listeners kind of know my deal. And we have a lot of overlap. We have some differences. Why don't I just start by giving you a chance to give us 1 or 2 sentences of like your faith background, where you find yourself today.
I would say, I was describing myself to one of my friends the other day, and I was like, I think I'm kind of like an Orthodox mystic, in the sense where, I know we were going to maybe talk about a couple statements of faith, and I think in general, I'll be pretty Orthodox with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 things. I grew up in church. My dad was an elder at the church I grew up at in Buffalo, New York. I'm a worship leader at my church in the suburbs of Philadelphia. My best friend my whole life is the pastor of our church. So I have a ton of connections, not only to church throughout my life, but also even at this exact moment, all while still wrestling through many, questions and reading everything from, Rob Bell to Henry Nouwen to something that's much more kind of, down the middle, like a Francis Chan. You know what I mean? Like I find myself kind of in different corners of evangelicalism, and even, faith continues to be something that I pursue in my daily life. I pursue in my parenting. I pursue in my being a husband. And even in the areas that I struggle or will have kind of accepted that I might not get a concrete answer, I still sort of try to move towards it and move towards Christ. And maybe that means different things to different folks, but I'm trying not to get too long-winded about that. But that's sort of where I am at the moment, and I probably left out 23 years in between.
Well, I love that you got a little poetic there. I am going to do the opposite. I have devised a quick little game to help us with this thumbnail sketch, to sort of people who, and maybe they don't know who I am, that's fine too. And if they found us on YouTube or something, I have found the closest, quote, Bible church, unquote, to my house here in North Seattle.
Like as far as proximity?
Google Maps. This is the number 1 closest thing that came up when I searched Bible church. This is from the What We Believe page on the Logos Bible Church in Kenmore, Washington's website.
Maybe you could check them out sometime.
No, it's not going to be for me, as you're about to find out.
Okay.
What we're going to do here is we are not going to unpack our answers here. We have 5 possible answers that we can each give for each of these items. We're going to end up talking about this stuff as we talk about the show. But I think it can be helpful for people to have like a rough idea. Where's Dan coming from? Where's Jeff coming from? The 5 answers that we can each give for each of these items, I have 7 items. These are the more controversial items, not the more straightforward ones. You can say agree without qualification, agree with qualifications, unsure, disagree with qualifications, or disagree without qualifications. And we each will give an answer and no other descriptions.
Okay.
We're going to do it quickly. Okay, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, number 1, these are all direct quotes from the faith statement. We believe that the Bible is the inerrant, infallible, and fully inspired Word of God as written in its original manuscripts. Do you want to go first each time? You want me to go first each time? Should we go every other?
Every other. You kick it off.
Okay, disagree with qualifications on that one.
Agree with qualifications.
Agree with qualifications. Okay, number 2, Jesus Christ is God, the living Word, who became flesh and was conceived by the Holy Spirit and was born of the Virgin Mary. Jeff?
I'm going to agree. No qualifications.
I'm going to disagree with qualifications.
Okay.
Tantalizing. People are going to have to keep listening to find out why.
This is exciting.
Number 3, Jesus Christ satisfied divine justice and brought salvation to all people who believe in him and him alone. I'm up first. That's going to be a hard no from me, dog. Disagree without qualifications on that one.
Thank you for bringing up Randy Jackson during this kind of heavy moment.
Yeah.
I'm going to agree with qualifications.
Okay. Number 4, man sinned by disobeying God, and thus man, humanity, became alienated from its creator. This historic fall brought the whole of humanity under condemnation. Man is corrupt by nature and cannot please God.
I'm agree with qualifications because there's one thing in there that's a little tough for me. I'm
Okay.
saying more than I should. Your turn.
That's fine. I'm again hard no. Disagree without qualifications on that one.
Can we go to this church together sometime? Maybe I visit you. I come say hi to you guys, and we go, on Sunday, and then we go get
See what
coffee.
happens?
Yeah.
We could play a game where it's like, how long do I last sitting
Yeah.
in the service? Okay, number 5. We believe in the second coming of the Lord Jesus Christ, who will return to earth personally, visibly, and bodily to fulfill God's plan from eternity. I think this is another disagree without qualifications from me.
I'm going to say agree.
Without qualifications.
Without qualifications.
You're okay. You're looking to the actual literal sky. Okay.
Well, okay.
I'm not. I mean, visibly, bodily, personally.
Visibly, bodily, personally, from the sky.
Hey, personally, I don't really know actually what personally means in this context. What would it mean for Jesus to return non-personally?
Listen, this is like somewhere between agree without qualifications and unsure, because this is in the end of all things. This is probably where I begin to kind of struggle a bit. Like, what will
things a bit beyond our pay grade kind of stuff.
I already said agree. It's far beyond my pay grade, but I'm going to still stick with agree.
Okay. Number 6, with the return of Christ, the dead will be resurrected and judged, the believer unto eternal life and the non-believer unto eternal damnation. Jeff.
Yeah, this is where I go into disagree with qualifications.
Same. I'm also disagree with qualifications here. Interesting. All right. Finally, number 7, we believe that mankind was created in the image of God as male and female. Marriage, as designed by God, is between one man and one woman. Logos Bible Church, I love that I was able to get in there. Logos Bible Church will only officiate and recognize marriages based on God's original design. Hard no from me, dog. That's a disagree without qualifications.
Yeah. Agree with qualifications.
Okay. All right. Spicy.
Man,
so it's going to be fun to see this stuff poking out. I want to say I gave all disagrees. There are some things that most churches believe that I also believe. It's not like I do still consider myself a Christian. There was some stuff about like the Eucharist and baptism and other things that I agreed with, but it wasn't as fun to put that stuff in here. So,
and kind of on the other end, as someone who your listeners, unless they've listened to Pretty Good Vibrations, they don't know me.
They don't know you. Yeah.
I, as an Orthodox mystic, I find myself saying yes to almost all of those, but I love to discuss and kind of find the nuances in there that are worthy of discussion, and many of those are, right? And I have and continue to have those conversations and love to discuss those things. So, listeners, just give me a chance, please.
Give the guy a break.
Jeez, come on.
Let's do the plot. A little bit of a circular plot here because this episode is trying to introduce us to a bunch of the key players largely other than Jesus himself. So we start with Mary Magdalene. She appears to be around 6 or 7 years old. It is a flashback to the year 2 AD in Magdala. So that's how we know who we're looking at. She's having a nightmare or something, and her dad points out this very bright star that's just sitting in there in the sky, maybe like 100 satellites worth of lumens. Obviously, I think this is supposed to be the star that the Magi follow to baby Jesus. We then get her as an adult. She's a prostitute in Galilee, and she's going by the name of Lilith. She is clearly not doing well. Then we meet Nicodemus. He is a popular and respected teacher among the Pharisees, and he's being a little bit shaken down by a Roman magistrate named Quintus. In another part of town, we meet Matthew. He is a young tax collector who is despised by his fellow Jews for basically financial collaboration with the Roman occupiers. He's a warmer version of the Sheriff of Nottingham in Disney's Robin Hood, you might say.
Yeah.
He is portrayed as lonely and disillusioned. But in the first clip we get of him, he appears to be trying on the viral dress that is either gold and white or black and blue. I don't know did you notice that, Jeff?
That was you texted me that, and I got a good chuckle out of that.
I was proud of that. I should save it for the pod so I can get a real laugh out of you. Simon Peter, or as you might know him, Fast Eddie in the Paul Newman film The Hustler, is then shaking down his fellow fishermen by pretending to lose a fight just long enough to get all the smart money against him before quite literally jumping Jehoshaphat. That's his brother-in-law. Jehoshaphat calls in another brother because apparently it's WWE Raw rules, and he's allowed to bring in, tap a partner who then hits Simon, and somehow that doesn't disqualify Jehoshaphat in this game that they're playing. And Andrew, Simon's brother, by the way, I was really proud of myself that I knew his name was Andrew before I heard that. Yeah, I was like, Simon Peter's brother is Andrew.
Yeah, good job.
He sulks as he hands over what would have been their illicit winnings. Nicodemus is called in to exorcise a demon or many demons from Lilith, but to no avail. Lilith tries to repeat those calming words that her father taught her. We're going to talk about those in a minute. That's a big part of the plot, is this prayer that she recites with her dad as a kid. She tries to use it to distract herself from what appears to be like a PTSD flashback to a rape or sexual assault by a Roman soldier. Didn't work. More on that later. Nicodemus and his wife have a heated exchange about how much we can know about God. Now Lilith has some exchanges with her friendly neighborhood barkeep. Simon hatches a plan to become essentially a Roman informer to keep their fishing livelihood going, as Matthew exacts punishing taxes on Rome's behalf. And then finally, after about 50 minutes of a 52-minute episode, much like the shark in Jaws, we meet Jesus himself. We finally see him. He stops Mary from taking a drink from the bartender, and he quotes the very same Isaiah passage. After identifying her real name, that she's Mary of Magdala, she is not Lilith. How'd I do on the plot, Jeff?
You did awesome on the plot, and you even helped me with a couple sticking points.
Clarified some things for you?
I think you did. I think you did great. And yeah, I sort of rewatched that first episode for, to prepare for this. And
yeah. So I have kind of a series of things I'd like to talk about, and I know you do as well. And we're going to try and sort of keep them chronological. So starting at the very beginning, there is a title card. Basically what it tells me is this production of the life of Jesus is a creedal, little o Orthodox perspective that's being mainstream Christian understanding. It refers to the, quote, true stories of the Gospels of Jesus Christ. Yeah. This is not going to be some History or Discovery Channel show where they interview a bunch of historical, critical, biblical scholars from Harvard and Yale. This is closer to the Passion of the Christ. Is that kind of your sense?
Yes. And I also, I jotted down a couple of the things that they said in that first little time. They said some timelines and locations have been combined or condensed.
Yeah.
Which I thought was kind of an interesting way to put that. Yes, like creedal, like you mentioned, but maybe pulling from multiple gospels, right? To kind of, combine certain kind of, retellings of the story of Jesus.
What's interesting, there is kind of an interesting church history angle here, which is that there was a guy at one point who tried to harmonize all the gospels together. Tatian, Tatian, a Syrian Christian theologian around 160 AD, and the church rejected this approach.
Okay.
The church was like, no, we don't have one unified account of the life of Jesus. We have 4 accounts that have real differences in them, and that is the way that we think God wants it to be. And that's interesting. Now, in a show, you can't do that. Right. I mean, I guess you could do you could do the Chosen Rashomon edition where it's all, it's just told from the 4 different perspectives or whatever. But I recognize their need narratively to sort of put it into one story. Yeah. And I like that they call that out. I think that's just above board and helpful.
It just stood out to me as, cause I don't think when I first watched it, I didn't really pay attention to the Star Wars beginning.
Yeah. The scrolling titles. I do think it might be worth to tie this in with our thumbnail sketch from the wonderful, friendly folks at Logos Bible Church. We're probably coming at this from a different perspective in terms of what we assume to be the historical accuracy of these stories. I'll start by just saying, for me, my take on the gospel accounts of Jesus is that, at least for the 3 synoptics, I'm a little less clear on John, but for the 3 synoptics, my rough understanding is this is roughly the kind of guy that Jesus of Nazareth was, and these are the kinds of things he said, and many of these are the most famous stories that were passed down via oral tradition for the at least 40 years or so between his crucifixion and the writing of Mark, which is thought to be the first one, pretty unanimously. But that, however, the specific location of individual sayings to individual people in a particular timeline is not the kind of thing that historical critical biblical scholars think can be really argued for. More likely, it's that the gospel writers were biographers in the ancient sense. They were crafting something with a narrative arc, and they had particular aims. They were working with materials that dated, some of the materials they're working with dated to before they were working. But I don't see the Gospels as a blow by blow accurate historical account of Jesus's life, but neither do I think that they are pure fantasy, the sort of wish fulfillment of, some oppressed people in the ancient Near East. I'm kind of somewhere in between on that. So I'm kind of more interested from a narrative perspective than a what are the historical facts perspective. That's where I'm coming from.
I appreciate that. And I would say, I haven't dove into, the ways in which each of the Gospels were translated or when they were. I knew that one of them, Mark, was kind of the most recent or, done the closest to, Jesus's
the events,
resurrection. Yeah. I would think of these two, and that's kind of where at the very beginning, when I say agree with qualifications, taking into account what might be, human error or the changing of stories as it's passed down, and certain elements kind of remaining, and I think that's kind of what these guys are even, I think, saying as they take all 4 Gospels and sort of bring them together, is we're bringing the kind of greater themes and the greater highlights, if you will, of what has been passed down from these 4 Gospels to what we find to be the orthodox retelling of historical Jesus.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. So I want to start with the first scene, 6 or 7-year-old Mary with her dad, right? So he is quoting this passage from Isaiah that's basically saying, "Fear not, for I have chosen you." And I'm going to put on therapist hat here. This is a perfect use of religion from parent to child. That's what I want to say. And even non-Christian researchers will talk about this, like Lisa Miller from Columbia University in her book, The Spiritual Child. She talks about the value of spirituality for children. And her definition of spirituality is basically engagement with a higher power that is loving and guiding. And what the research shows is that this kind of spiritual understanding provides children with meaning, purpose, connection to something bigger than themselves. It offers them a framework for understanding their place in the world and coping with life's challenges. Spiritually grounded children are more likely to exhibit traits like empathy, compassion, and forgiveness, which contribute to healthier relationships and emotional resilience. I'm reading, by the way, from summaries of peer-reviewed research here. This is not me just kind of throwing stuff out there. Spirituality is a protective factor against anxiety and depression. One of the ways that happens is through positive coping strategies, which is actually what we see here, right? That she's having a bad dream and her dad's like, here's a way of coping with that bad dream. Repeat back this language to yourself. Yes. And the reason that we would call that positive is she's not consuming something to take her mind off of it. It's not a form of distraction. It's like, hey, we're facing this head on and we are repeating these words that God is basically holding us as Israelites.
Yes.
Right? A couple more things from the research and then I'm going to kick it to you. So studies have shown that children with a strong sense of spirituality are more likely to engage in activities like prayer, meditation, or seeking social support, which can help buffer against the development of depression and anxiety. Another factor is meaning and purpose, which also shows up here in this scene, right? Mary can place herself and her father in a story about the Israelites, the meaning of their life, the purpose of their life as individuals and as a group. And these spiritually oriented children, they often have a greater sense of meaning and purpose, which helps alleviate feelings of hopelessness or existential distress, which are commonly associated with depression and anxiety. Now, as we're going to find out, it doesn't stick. It doesn't stick at least in the medium term for Mary or Lilith. But I thought that I was impressed by this show starting off with something that I found to be so psychologically rich.
Exactly. And I, as a father of 3 young boys, my kids are 3, 7, and 9. So one of them, my middle guy, is probably right around what we're saying Lilith's age, was.
Yeah.
And there was something that was just sort of like not only inspiring as far as the way the dad was interacting with the daughter during this kind of difficult moment, but also just kind of like, I've tried maybe successfully or unsuccessfully or both, to have moments like that where my kids are, having a bad dream or had a bad day at school or someone said something to them that hurt their feelings or, especially my 2 older guys who are starting to process the world, slightly differently and increasingly. And as I sort of wrap my mind around as a parent, what type of scripture or what type of thoughts can I pass along to my kids that might help them, that they still can actually process? And I thought that this was such a good job of a good example of something that maybe a young child in distress could process. And, like for me, for one example is like, hey guys, if you're ever struggling with something or think that you're missing something, you could say, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing.
Yeah.
And just that, you know what I mean? I already have what I need in Christ, right? It also seemed like it was meaningful to the dad, didn't it? Like as he was...
Absolutely.
Almost as if it was something that he needed to remind himself of. And I think that's often the case when I'm telling my kids something like that. Most of it can also be applied to some sort of reminder that I need to.
Totally. I mean, there's something to finding expressions of faith that apply equally, but maybe slightly differently to young children and fully grown adults. But the idea that like God's got me, God is holding me, that's applicable now. I'm 40 years old. That's very applicable. I think of it differently than my 4-year-old thinks of it to the extent that I can get him to think about it at all. But like, it's not only working for kids or only working for adults. Like these ideas, they can sort of cross generational boundaries. I really like that.
Yeah, I thought it was a great way to start the show.
So moving on to Quintus the magistrate, as he is talking with Nicodemus, his little mustache twirling conversation with Nicodemus, he mentions a number of Jewish factions that are competing with the Pharisees for influence and power. He mentions the Sadducees, the Essenes, the Zealots, and individual preachers that are prophesying about a Messiah, which may or may not be a reference to John the Baptist. I kind of took it as one. As far as I understand the scholarship, this is a pretty good picture of the sort of religio, social, political situation on the ground at the time of Jesus. But I think that what's more interesting to me is that and this is maybe the more controversial point for a more faithful or Orthodox audience, this is actually kind of always true all the time, everywhere of religion, especially in cultures that have something of a religious free market, right? Like not a state church, not something that sort of compels people one way or the other, but a place where there are legitimate options for people. Like scholars of religion in the United States talk about this religious free market all the time. And the way that they understand different movements growing and waning is in part a function of like what religious entrepreneurs are able to do. And that is just, I always find that interesting. That sort of breadth of stuff. I was curious if you thought about that or picked up on that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought. I don't have a ton to add because it didn't jump out to me in the moment. But
Well, it's like you can think of kind of blatant examples of this. Like there are certain streams of like, for instance, Pentecostalism that have gotten real cozy with Donald Trump. Right. That's sort of akin to if the Pharisees are kind of colluding with Rome to sort of have more favor with Rome than the Sadducees have, amongst their various disagreements. But then I think in a general sense, it's true in a less critical way. Like if we move, like we're moving, right? We're moving to a different city in Washington in a couple months, and we will have many churches to choose from. Christian churches, non-Christian churches, all these different denominations. And the word that Quintus uses is like vying for the people's hearts or something like that. Right. And that is effectively what the Baptist church down the street from us, the Episcopal Cathedral, the Presbyterian, they're vying for the hearts of the people of the town I'm moving to, right? Like not in a gross way necessarily, but they are offering what they do, and the other groups are offering what they do. Right. And it's just kind of, I like it when I can draw a connection between this ancient story and the modern day and find the things that are just fundamentally human. When we read the gospel stories, we kind of assume that the people who didn't get Jesus right, maybe they were bad, maybe they were sort of like uniquely out of it or, whatever. But it's like, they were like us. Like if you lived at the time of Jesus, especially in these early days of the ministry, like you lived at a time like now in a lot of ways, and in very differently in other ways, of course. We're going to talk at some point, I think, about occupying army in your country, which is different. Thankfully, we don't have that right now. Yeah. But in a lot of ways, it's just the human experience. And like, who is this new guy? And I love the psychology of that. I just find that I'll never stop being interested in the basic human psychological experience.
And I wonder if you guys would even reconsider moving now that you know that church is right down the street from you guys.
Now that we've got Logos Bible Church as an option.
Yeah, I think you might have been missing that. I'm part of a church that is relatively new to our area. Our church started in like a school building in an area of 15 or 20 minutes from here. And then a few years ago, we moved into a sort of a different community, and we suddenly began to reach a different community. Yeah. And some of the folks that came to the church because it used to be close to them, maybe no longer did. And now we are reaching a different neighborhood and different community. And yeah, like, we might not be vying for their attention in the same exact way that you mentioned it, but I know what you mean. Like we want to be known as a place where people can come, and hopefully hear something that is Christ-centered, and people that can come around them, meet their needs as the church is supposed to do. Yeah. In this area, right? In this specific area. So no, I think that's a good point about what was kind of happening, locally there or, regionally there.
You could ask the question of whether that is like on the whole good for the faith of like a nation to have these basically a free market for religious entrepreneurs versus a state church like you have like in Norway and Sweden and many other countries. And it's not like the other churches aren't allowed, but there's like a more straightforward citizenship path and all these things. And you could argue that is one of the things that's kept America more religious, is that people are able, it's almost like it's like free market capitalism in the sense of like the freer the markets, the more that products and people will naturally find each other. Now, there are drawbacks to that, but I don't know. It's interesting. I don't. That's not really my field, but I find it kind of interesting.
No, I think that's interesting.
So Nicodemus, I forgot. I actually left this out. I left out his Catskills one-liners routine of old school Jewish humor, talking about the Dead Sea. He's laying a heavy trip on some fellow Pharisees in Galilee. That was
one of my comments, that there was kind of like varying levels of Pharisee, right?
Yeah.
It's like when you say like the Pharisees did this or think like this, but it was almost like he thought of himself as even in a different place than some of the other Pharisees. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's how it's portrayed, that there's like a real hierarchy and he's near the top. And he tells them the Messiah is not going to show up if they persist in this rampant unholiness. And Jeff, I'm going to warn you, you're going to have to prepare yourself for the unholiness here. The Messiah will not show up if they persist in the rampant unholiness of eating fish that are caught by, wait for it, fishermen, who are a filthy lot inside and out. Now, I think this is an interesting idea in general. You do see it in multiple religious traditions over time. And maybe there's even kind of a secular counterpart if I thought about it more. But the idea that like God won't act until society has gotten their shit together to some particular degree. No one knows where that line is. People will give various accounts, but it does seem to have some motivational power for groups. I hear stuff like that coming out of American evangelicalism. Certainly you hear things about like, well, Christ won't return until all the nations have been reached and things like this. But you also hear it more in the context of like the United States being judged for our faithfulness or lack of faithfulness. I'm at a point where I find all of that like just thoroughly unconvincing. I am curious if you have a different take on that.
Yeah, no, I think that there is maybe something related to that in this kind of like from certain parts of evangelicalism, like take America back or get back to, this certain way of being so that God can bless us again or bless our country or church or whatever the case may be again. Yeah. And I do think that something about this, wherever it has infiltrated, there's something that there was this previous time where things were better and it's no longer that way, unfortunately. And until it becomes that way again, God won't move or certain things won't move or we won't be successful or we won't have money or we won't have power. You know what I mean? Something about what once was that no longer is this, you know what I mean? This kind of a little bit in the air in certain sects of, evangelicalism, SECTS.
Yes, I understand.
So, you know what I mean? Like, I think that there's something about that I'm getting from, your thought too.
Yeah, that we are sort of corporately judged by God, and that there are real world ramifications for God's momentary appraisal of our righteousness.
Yeah, until we collectively get it together, we're in trouble.
And what's interesting about that is, I don't believe that that's true, like spiritually. I don't think that God. I think that God is essentially always willing the best possible outcome for every single creature all the time at every moment and constantly doing whatever God can do to lure us freely toward those outcomes. So I don't buy that idea at all. But it's not as if that idea is ineffective in the real world. If a lot of people do believe that we need to like love justice as a society, well, those people are going to, pass some laws,
yes.
that redistribute wealth or something. Yep. So there can be a real, in that sense, it can be true. And but it's more of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's more like the role that we play of bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth, to use that kind of Christian language.
Right. Mm-hmm. I like that.
Tell me about Simon Peter and his jokester wife, who apparently completely nonplussed about the money that he lost in the fight. Although I think he's hiding from her the true state of their finances. I did get that sense.
Yeah, I was like, what I wrote in my notes was that it was nice to see some relatable marital issues that Peter was having,
Yeah.
that we all might struggle with. But then I said, in the same breath, I'm also not in the habit of fighting her brother.
Physically throwing down with your
Physically
brother-in-law.
fighting
Yeah.
my brother-in-law, who is a really nice guy named Ryan, but he also lives in Birmingham, Alabama. So even if we did want to fight, it would be expensive. It
Yeah.
would take a lot of time.
You'd spend more on the flights than you could ever
Yes.
make back hustling.
And even me saying, "Hey Ryan, I'm going to be there, later today or tomorrow, and then we can settle this." Things may have even calmed down by then. But
I'm hopping on the red eye. You better believe I'm going to still be mad, but then
Yeah,
you
and I'm
totally
sure-
cool out. Yeah.
if only Peter had a flight to sort of calm down, I think that they could have solved this a different way. But you know what I liked.
By the way,
about-
you're calling him Peter. His name is Simon at this point in the story.
Simon, you're right. My
Jesus
fault.
will rename him Peter.
Okay.
We call in the
Simon.
Christian tradition we refer to him as Simon Peter sometimes because same person. But this is the guy on whom Jesus will tell that he's going to build the rock on whom he's going to build his church, which will then separate Protestants from Catholics and Orthodox for centuries to come. How to interpret that verse? Yeah.
So Simon, but what I liked about this disagreement between him and his wife is it started in one way, and then she kind of, she seemed pretty angry and she was struggling with certain things, but then she was kind of reminding him sort of what makes her family, what's different about her family.
Yeah.
But coloring it in a way that was like, hey, remember, this is one of the reasons you like me too. And
Yeah.
she says we're colorful and fun, kind of putting a different spin on her family, where Simon was kind of struggling with it. I don't know. I really liked the way that this little marital sort of issue was sort of resolved in a sweet way, but that there's like a reminder that these guys are still struggling with a lot of the same things that we might, just in different ways. And even her telling him to go change because he smells bad. Like, I liked the humanity of this scene.
Yeah, I liked that too. I wonder if it's historically accurate. I wonder how many marriages were that equitable in a time in which women were basically property of husbands.
Yeah, interesting. So maybe there wasn't as much of a discussion.
But then again, even in like really complementarian, strict gender role segments of modern Christianity, when you actually get into the homes, a lot of these places, like people figure out a way to share power. Yes. And also women did not have, as I understand it, there was not the division of labor between breadwinning father and child-caring mother. That really comes in like Victorian England, and with the Industrial Revolution, men start going away to work, and actually in the ancient Near East, like it was a lot more like family businesses where adults and then children of a certain age would kind of all work at the family business. So, I don't know the answer. That's not really my area, but
no, interesting thought though.
But yeah, it's interesting. So back to Mary Magdalene or Lilith.
Yeah.
One thing that it seems to me, and you've seen farther, that they are treating her with quite a bit of nuance and compassion in the series, but they do take the narrative decision of having her be a prostitute as an adult. So this view that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute is not based on any biblical evidence. And as I understand the scholarly consensus, it's that she was very, very likely not a prostitute. In fact, one of Jesus's closest disciples and one of the funders of his ministry. Luke lists her as one of a handful of women who are actively funding the ministry out of their own means. And it's pretty hard to believe that Jesus would be cool with her getting those means via prostitution while she is one of his closest disciples. That seems really unlikely.
And as not too much of a spoiler, you do kind of see her kind of come around in a way that you might be describing a little bit.
Okay, yeah, that'll be interesting to see. But prostitution in those days, not a super lucrative job. No. It's more likely that she was independently wealthy or what we would call today like comfortably middle class at the minimum. such that she could basically donate a good chunk of her own money while still being able to live and fund the ministry. Because Jesus, of course, not doing carpentry during the years of his ministry, and a bunch of people following him. Everybody's got to eat, stuff like that. They rely a lot on donations.
It would have been nice to get a couple clues from her father at the beginning when he was reading her this part from Isaiah that, maybe it was kind of a close-up shot, so you couldn't really tell if he was just surrounded by,
They pan out and then they own like 1,000 sheep or something.
Oh, yeah. And you could just tell he's just doing super well.
Loaded,
We couldn't tell from that first scene.
No. And there is some really interesting kind of scholarship about Mary Magdalene. She's the first witness to the resurrection in one of the accounts. She's entrusted with sharing that news with the rest of the disciples.
Yeah.
Her encounters with Jesus in the text are characterized by mutual respect, even like intellectual exchange. And she's really treated, for a woman in first century literature, she's actually treated very respectfully.
Right.
And the prostitute view was popularized in the 500s by Pope Gregory. And today, scholars generally think like that's the result of misogyny in the church in the first 1,000 years of the church. The kind of thing that Jesus is pretty against. I'm sure they're going to use it to narrative effect. In fact, by the end of the first episode, they already are using it to narrative effect. Maybe we can jump there before we run out of time here today. Yeah. I really felt like that final scene when Jesus comes in, I was sort of surprised at how powerful it was.
It was.
I think that they are obviously her current line of work brings some additional narrative tension to that. The fact that, Nicodemus was unable to exorcise the demon, and then Jesus shows up. He knows who she is. He kind of knows about her life. They're obviously portraying it in a kind of Jesus as second person of the Trinity has like all of this like magical knowledge basically about people, which is obviously one way that Christians have understood what Jesus' experience would have actually been like on earth. That'll be fun to get into as we get more Jesus in subsequent episodes. And
I obviously liked that full circle moment with her father reading this.
Quoting the same word. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I
great.
called you by name, and then Jesus literally kind of almost in like a first person, way. Just, I thought that was a very moving scene. And even though we're telling people that we watched it so they don't have to, I really think they should probably watch this scene. Because
you could just watch the last 5 minutes of the episode to get.
We're saying that sort of tongue in cheek, a little bit ish.
Yeah.
No, but I really enjoyed the way it ended, and I know we're kind of running out of time here. There was one other Nicodemus moment. I don't know if you want to touch on. Just, as we talked about kind of like the varying levels of Pharisee and just some of his questions between him and his wife, where he was kind of, picking apart certain things in a way that she was uncomfortable with. Like, when did Shabbat become theater? Why must I perform? Were a couple of the questions he asked. And then like just a few seconds later, he said, he was looking in this mirror. He said, what if we're not seeing the whole picture? Maybe it's way more beautiful and strange than we could ever imagine. I thought that was maybe the best line in that episode. Maybe it's more beautiful and strange than we could ever imagine. And his wife being like, basically like, stop this blasphemy, right? No, didn't she say that?
Yeah. And she's like, you are supposed to have answers, not questions.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. That made me think exactly of this story. I've retold it a lot of times on the podcast, but my friend Tony Jones, John Piper, saying to him, people don't want 5 atonement theories. You have to give them one atonement theory, even though there have been 5. They need one narrative to rally around. And that's like almost exactly what Nicodemus's wife is saying here. That people
don't look to you for questions. They look to you for answers.
And she's right. And John Piper's right. He's right functionally, but he's not right in truth. If we want to tell people the truth, then we would tell them that there are 5 atonement theories, not one. There was one thing I wanted to talk about with you about that moment. I loved that moment too, of what if, we're seeing through a glass dimly, essentially, to echo Paul's words. What if it's bigger and kind of weirder than we thought? There's an interpretation of this that I think probably the average evangelical would take, which is what he's referring to is that Jesus is coming and Jesus is going to show that Judaism is wrong, or at least woefully inadequate, and that he's got the real thing, which is the new covenant. And this is, in theological terms, this is called supersessionism. It's the idea that once Jesus shows up and we've got Christianity, that Christianity is superior to Judaism. It renders Judaism basically like not necessary anymore. This is, I don't know if that's a heresy, but most theologians in the history of Christianity fight against that, right? Generally, there will be some way of including both, but it's so psychologically straightforward to just say that the new stuff's better than the old stuff, that I think there's sort of a constant temptation for Christians to sort of slip into supersessionism. You run into real problems though with the Old Testament if you do that, because what is God like? When God says like, I will never break my covenant with Israel, like, was God like lying about, so there's real problems, which is why most Christian theologians don't hold this view. But at the popular level, it's really common. Like, I wonder, is that where your mind went when you saw that scene, or was yours more of a, sort of a more open-handed, like, well, how big could this be? Yes. Or was it like, no, it's Jesus, it's not the Torah?
Yeah, honestly, now that you mention it, I love that take. My brain didn't go there. It was kind of like this guy who wasn't supposed to question certain things, wasn't supposed to wonder about, why do we do Sabbath the way we do? Why do we have to feel like it's performance or theater? Or what if we're just looking at this from maybe the wrong angle?
Yeah.
That was kind of where my brain went, was I liked this guy's questions because he wasn't, his wife and probably those who maybe follow him wouldn't want to hear those questions or thoughts from him.
Yeah, and that's where my brain went too with that scene, and why I loved it, because I think the other way to interpret it is in a more broad, just sort of open-handed, more inclusivist direction of like, look, we have our faith, and you can apply that to Nicodemus the Pharisee, but you can apply it to Dan the Protestant in 2024. I've got, like, at all times, human beings live in only the time that they live in. And yet we know there are other times and there are other people, and there's going to be a future in which people see things, a lot of things, very differently than we see them, because we know how differently we see things from people in the past. And that is the power in it for me, of like, it was cool to see that given voice in the show, and kind of the way I would frame it, my question about where it will go is like, will the show go in more of a supersessionist direction, where it really ends up being about how Jesus solved Judaism kind of a thing, and like is the real thing? Or will it go in more of like the Shack direction, a bit more of like a popular, that's more of a populist stream of evangelicalism that's like, hey, look, we're kind of still Jesus people. We're a little bit hippie still. We're open to the movement of the Spirit, and we're curious about what God's doing. And that's our fundamental commitment, not to the sort of in-group, out-group boundaries of our sect. And I'm curious. My guess, I'm 50-50. I really don't know where the show is going to go. And you do know, and you're not going to tell me.
I wish I could tell you, and these aren't the questions that I want from you either. As a guy,
you're being Nicodemus's wife.
Yeah, Nicodemus. We need answers from you, not questions. Yeah, but no,
I'm the expert here. Yeah,
exactly. Stop acting otherwise.
Okay.
But no, I think not to spoil. I know we're kind of wrapping up here, but I think the show kind of heads in an interesting direction, and I think actually gets better as it goes. Like I said, I haven't seen the whole thing, but I like seeing these things that are often on pages in color in a different way. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I think it just.
Yeah, there's a real value to that. A pin in it for next time. I mean, there's going to be more demon possession, and I would definitely want to talk about the overlap between what they would have called demon possession and today what we would call mental illness. I even think there was like a little indication from one of the characters that there might be some squishiness on that in an interesting way, that it's not going to be super reductive of, these are all just demons, and that's why Nicodemus needed hyssop and various herbs or whatever, because essentially like Judaistic shamanism or something. Like my sense is that it's going to be a little bit more nuanced, and that'll provide for good fodder. But we're done for today. We will be back for episode 2 at some point, maybe 2 and 3, and we'll get the temperature from people on how often they'd like us to do this and whatnot. But Jeff, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Nice to meet you. You have permissionaries, I think they're called.
Yeah, the permissionaries. Yeah.
Thanks for having me, and let's see what happens next.